My father, listen. Enemy ships have come here. They've burned down my towns and did evil things in my country. Does my father not know that all my troops and chariots are in the land of Hatti, and all my ships are in the land of Luca? Thus the land is left abandoned to itself. May my father know this. 7 enemy ships have come here and inflicted terrible damage upon us. The last king of Ugarit, Hammurabi, speaks of foreigners attacking his shores and devastating his country, which would soon be utterly broken by invading forces from the north. Bronze Age collapse was now in full swing. In the early 12th century BC, the massive Hittite Empire, overlord of Ugarit, would soon collapse under its own weight, while most countries in the Near East and Anatolia would follow suit. Sometime later, Ramesses III's Egypt suddenly faces multiple enemies in the Levant and the Nile Delta, the infamous Sea Peoples. In this video, we'll prove that all of the Sea Peoples Ramesses faces are of Anatolian origin and did not come from either Mycenaean Greece or Central Mediterranean, making the case that the Mycenaean elites actually destroyed their countries in a desperate attempt to flee a collapsing Aegean, forcing them to migrate outside their homeland. In this second part of our Bronze Age collapse series, we expand on this alternative theory behind the collapse developed by independent researcher Carlos Moro using archaeological and linguistic evidence. We'll show how an organized invasion of Anatolia led to the destabilization and resettlement of the Near East in the series of events Moro calls as the second wave of Sea Peoples. To quickly recap the previous episode, we have explained how the first wave of Sea Peoples that Egypt faced were nobody else but the Achaeans, better known as the Mycenaeans, and their Anatolian allies. This was a response to the Hittite invasion of Cyprus and the embargo established by the Hittites that prohibited the flow of trade between Mesopotamia and the Aegean, as both their eastern and western frontier was collapsed. The Achaeans have colonized Cyprus and the Carmel coast in an attempt to keep the copper flowing into the Aegean, their attacks culminating in the Battle of Perir, which aimed at establishing a Libyan dynasty in New Kingdom Egypt. We explained that the Wheshesh or Akawasha were the Achaeans, the Luca were from the Lycia region, the Teresh were from Wilusha, and the Sherden and Shekelesh were from the Sheha riverland, the latter three peoples being from Anatolia and not Central Mediterranean. Amongst archaeological evidence, the foreign practice of circumcision amongst these peoples, as well as their numbers, was also used as further evidence of their settlement and harmonic coexistence with the Canaanites. The Greeks had raided the mainland Hittite territory, as per the words of Pharaoh Ramesses III during the period, but didn't attempt to directly challenge the Hittites in a large-scale battle. Nevertheless, this coalition had been defeated by the Pharaoh, and Cyprus would be recaptured soon by the Hittites. The status quo had been re-established, and copper still did not flow into the Aegean, destabilizing the Achaean homeland. Copper and tin were immensely important in the Bronze Age world, as they could be used to manufacture high-grade weapons and armor, and thus, with the failure of their former expedition, the Achaeans would attempt a more direct action. An alarm was set off in Mycenaean Greece. During the period, more palaces are abandoned or destroyed as their centralized palace economy was falling apart. The expensive military expedition conducted by the temporary Mycenaean coalition to re-establish control over the eastern trade routes in Cyprus, Canaan and Egypt failed, and so did faith in the government. Achaean Greece would devolve into utter anarchy as the uncontrolled growth of the warrior elite class during the previous century of Mycenaean prosperity suddenly saw fewer and fewer positions in governing and military due to the sudden economic decline, forcing an intense inter-elite competition. This is a textbook example of elite overproduction. We explain how elite overproduction was the main reason behind the collapse of Mycenaean Greece in a free article in our Patreon, so check it out after this video ends. Individual Greek warlords and mercenaries, unable to be paid and given power, decided to abandon their homeland and seek their luck in the east. They were perhaps inspired by the deeds of the freebooter Piyamaradu, argued by us to be the historical Achilles in another video, some 70 years earlier, who was a man with Achaean backing who raided, conquered and dethroned and established kings in western Anatolia. Troy was one of the first victims of their ambition, being utterly destroyed and plundered, with some Mycenaean ceramics being found in the city after the fact, but no evidence of conquest is attested. Perhaps this being the final chapter of the historical Iliad, which was probably a series of wars fought between the Mycenaeans and Wheshesh over Troy, surviving as dramatic epics. Other western Anatolian cities followed suit, including Miletus or Milawanda, a previously Libyan-speaking but Mycenaean vassal city-state which was under Hittite influence at that point. Homer also lists Miletus and most of western Anatolia as well as allies of Troy in the epics, most of them suffering annihilation in the period. Soon later, Cyprus is reconquered and settled by the Achaeans, building new impressive administrative buildings and producing a new type of Mycenaean ceramic on the island. This time there is evidence of large waves of migrations from Greece, as the island was gradually Hellenized by the newcomers. To avoid being attacked by the Hittites and their vassals, like before in the first wave, they took control of Tarsos in Kitsuwatna region, more commonly known as Adana. Similarly, sudden influx of Hellenic ceramics from Cyprus, coupled with destruction of local cities, points to conquest and settlement of the area. They proceeded to raid and destroy all nearby coasts, including Ugarit, which was obliterated. The people responsible for all this were not mere raiders, as they settled some of these areas. They were not simply unorganized refugees abandoning their homeland, as they had the military capability to destroy established kingdoms and build complex administrative buildings. They were outside the reach of Mycenaean Greece, as there is no evidence of copper movement into the Aegean, as well as ceramic influx from it onto the island. This is prime example of dissatisfied local elites abandoning their homeland to establish and rule over foreign kingdoms, bringing along swaths of the population with them. According to Morrow, the Mycenaeans must have allied with a people called Mushki of Balkan origin, members of the Phrygian collective, for these expeditions. The combined forces must have fought the Hittites somewhere in central Anatolia, with the Hittites being ultimately defeated by this new coalition. This defeat would leave the state vulnerable to the north, with the Kashkians expanding the frontier zone even more to the south, probably burning Hattusha like they did in the past. However, the difference now is that no organized resistance could be mounted, as much of Cilicia would be devastated or under foreign influence. Or in open rebellion, as the ruler of Tarhuntasha, Hartapus, would claim the title of the Great King for himself. The Phrygians would soon settle in Anatolia, and the eastern Mushki, who arrived with the Achaeans, conquered the Ishua region and even conducted raids against the Assyrians a bit later. Hartapus would soon defeat some of the Balkan invaders in pitched battle, although it's not clear whether he meant the eastern Mushki or the western Phrygian horde. The Hittite Empire, in a span of a few decades, collapsed into nothing, never to return. Cyprus was gradually Hellenized, and in the 10th century, the kingdom of Hiyawa appears in Adana in the Neo-Hittite and Assyrian records. Herodotus also speaks about the Epachei of Cilicia, meaning the Achaeans of the south. In addition, according to ancient mythology, some heroes moved to Cyprus and Cilicia after the fall of Troy. The Hiyawa in Libyan, a remnant of the Hittite Hiyawa, or the Nai in Phoenician, an ethnonym for the Greeks by Homer in Egypt, also claimed descendants from Mopsos, as so did the Mushki to the north, a mysterious person of Balkan origin. His name appeared in multiple times in Linear B documents and Hittite records. Mopsos was also a seer from Greek mythology who led a group of settlers eastwards along the southern Anatolian coast, passing through Pamphylia and Cilicia, where his name is attested in both Libyan and Phoenician inscriptions. Nevertheless, with these pieces of evidence at hand, and the presence of Phrygians in Anatolia recorded both by Greeks and Assyrians, it's without a doubt that this two-pronged invasion was real and displaced many local populations. The consequences were catastrophic, as large waves of refugees moved into Syro-Palestine in an attempt to flee the destruction of their homeland. Soon later, new kingdoms were formed, like Palestine or Walistin in Syria, as well as other Neo-Hittite kingdoms, all Libyan-speaking and keeping their culture alive in a new country. To the south, in Canaan, more of these people arrived and settled in the area, while others sailed all the way to Libya. Aside from the archaeological evidence, one ought to simply look at what the Egyptians had to say about the peoples they have fought under Ramesses III in 4 distinct wars. According to the Medinet Habu inscriptions, the pharaoh had to fight a group of tribes that attacked Egypt from the west, including mainly Libyans, but also supported by troops that look extremely similar to the sea peoples that attacked the delta later on, described as robbers plundering Egypt. The Meshwesh, one of the tribes amongst the Libyan forces, are particularly interesting, as it could mean there were a people from Mysia, perhaps merchants, settling in the region at some point earlier, as Egyptian records mention them even as far back as the 14th century BC. To further support their Anatolian origin, a secondary source, Papyrus Harris, also mentions a people named Tjeker present amongst the Libyans in these wars, their name being almost completely identical to the Caicus River in Mysia. Thus, since some of the attackers in the Libyan conflicts are clad in typical sea people attire, and taking into account the northwestern Anatolian phonological similarities in 2 different sources, there must have been Anatolian sea peoples present amongst the attackers in these 2 Libyan conflicts outside the traditional first wave attack. In year 8, Egypt faced a coalition of sea peoples in the Delta and in Canaan. Back in the year 5 inscription, a couple of sea peoples appear that attack Egypt later in year 8. The hieroglyphic text was previously translated by Breasted as following: "The northern countries are unquiet in their limbs, even the Peleset, the Thekel, who devastate their land. Their soul came in the last extremity, they were warriors upon land, also in the sea." The 2 peoples, namely Peleset and Thekel, seem to have devastated their own land for an unexplainable reason, which has been a major issue. 2 modern translations have been proposed, however, solving the mystery for good. According to Bendor, the text is translated as the following: "The northern foreign countries quivered in their bodies, namely the Philistines and the Shekelesh. Their land was devastated, their broken souls came." And according to a more recent translation, we have the following: "The northern lands shivered in their bodies, namely the Peleset and the Tjeker, since they were cut off from their land. In both cases, we see the passive voice in regards to the relationship with their land. Bendor claims the people's land was devastated, while Butrich claims they were cut off from their land. Therefore, somebody must have either occupied or destroyed their homeland, rendering them refugees. Also, interestingly, Bendor translates the Tjeker or Thekel, who can be associated with the Tefkri, another word for Trojans from the Troad region, as Sikila, akin to the Shekelesh, we have also introduced from the first wave. The Peleset, a new people, not seen in other conflicts, had their country also stolen or devastated. In year 8, the main inscription reads as follows according to Breasted. The countries, the northerners in their lands were disturbed, taken away in the fray at one time. Not one stood before their hands. From Keta, Kode, Karkemish, Arvad, Alasha, they were wasted. They set up a camp in one place in Amor. They desolated his people and his land like that which is not. They came with fire prepared before them forwards to Egypt. Their main support was Peleset, Thekel, Shekelesh, Denyen and Weshesh. These lands were united and they laid their hands upon the land as far as the circle of the earth. Their hearts were confident, full of their plans. This paragraph is being commonly misinterpreted as describing a coalition of 5 sea peoples devastating various regions of Anatolia, Cyprus and Syria, and then setting camp in Amuru in Syria. Then they kept on with their destructive raid towards Egypt. Another interpretation, however, would seem to be the more correct one. In this, the northerners in the Isles who attacked the aforementioned lands are different from the 5 sea peoples who set up camp in Amuru and then attacked Egypt, namely the Peleset, Thekel, Shekelesh, Denyen and Weshesh. In fact, the wall reliefs show these people traveling with women and children as migrants and not as an invading army. This has to be because their homeland, Anatolia and northern Syria, have been devastated by the so-called northerners. This mass of refugees were the victims of the earlier destruction, moving towards Syro-Palestine, searching for a territory to settle and causing further destruction themselves when they encountered opposition. The text also says they set up a camp in one place in Amor. We can see that the translator was uncertain of that part of the inscription and put it in brackets. What is certain is a camp in one place in Amor, but according to the text, the settlers in the camp could perfectly well have been those whose lands were destroyed and not the invaders. Thus, more precisely, the text should read, "The latter set up a camp in one place in Amor," differentiating clearly between the northerners and the settlers. The devastated lands are Keta, the land of Hatti, Kode, accepted to be Cilicia, Karkemish, rather the kingdom of Karkemish, since the city itself had survived the onslaught. Arvad, an island off the coast of Syria, or what appears to be a more correct translation, Arzawa, the region of western Anatolia. And Alasha, which is Alashia, meaning Cyprus. The 5 peoples must have been certainly from these areas, more specifically. The Peleset or Philistines are commonly misidentified as Mycenaean Greeks due to a possible translation of their name meaning friends of sails in Greek. Also in the Bible, the Philistines are called Kaftorim, meaning descendants of Crete. The presence of locally made Aegean-style pottery in the 12th century also prompted many to support this theory of origin. However, this has to be false when looking closer at the evidence at hand. In the 11th century, the Neo-Hittites Libyan-speaking kingdom of Palestine or Palestine appears in Syria. This nation worshipped the Neo-Hittite gods, spoke Libyan, and was ruled by kings with the names of previous Hittite rulers like Shupililuma. They obviously saw themselves as successors of the old Hittite Empire dislodged from their homeland and could not have been Greeks. These Philistines were different from the Philistines in Canaan, but we can assume safely that they must have come originally from Anatolia as well. In addition, the large kingdom of Hapala existed as a successor state of Arzawa back in the 13th century BC, in between the Libyans of the west and the Hittites in the east, with its southern part overlapping with a region archaic Greeks called Pisidia or Psidia. This Libyan-speaking kingdom lay at the heartland of Anatolia and must have been at the center of the collective 13th century Anatolian culture, quite literally. The Bible also calls these people Anakim, meaning sons of Anak. Since the Assyrians also called the large region of Anatolia Anak as well, this must be further proof of their Anatolian origins. But how could the locally made Aegean-inspired pottery be then explained in the 12th century? Or the fact that the Hebrews called them Kaftorim? The answer is simple: the Philistines inhabited the regions previously occupied by the Wheshesh in the late 13th century. We have explained previously why the Wheshesh, or modern translation Akawasha, must have been Achaeans with absolute certainty who colonized Canaan to retake control of the eastern trade routes in the first wave of Sea Peoples. Since the Philistines occupied territories overlapping with the previous Achaean conquerors, it's no surprise they have inherited some of the Mycenaean legacy and culture in the region. To further add to the argument, during the 12th century, all ceramics are locally made, and had the Philistines been the Mycenaeans who conquered Cyprus and the Cilician coast, we should be seeing large-scale imports from Cyprus in the mid-12th century, which is simply not true. Interestingly, according to a recent study, the biblical name Goliath of the Philistines has been attested in his home city, and the Greeks have also recorded the name Iliatos in later Caria, his name meaning the strong one in Libyan, making the name almost certainly Anatolian. Finally, the Peleset are dressed similarly to the rest of the Sea Peoples, who are most definitely from Anatolia. If the Peleset were Greeks, they would be drawn with boar tusk helmets and Greek weapons, as they were back in the 14th century, which was simply not true for the Peleset. If the Thekel and Shekelesh are similar people as seen from previous translations of the Year 5 inscription, and if we consult Papyrus Harris, which mentions the Sherden instead of the Shekelesh as part of these 5 peoples, we can conclude that the Sherden and the Shekelesh and the Thekel, ethnonyms being used interchangeably, must have been closely related peoples coming from northwestern Anatolia. The archaeological findings we talked about in the earlier first wave prove that the Sherden, Shekelesh and Teresh, who accompanied the Achaeans, were also some of the inhabitants of the Canaan settlements 30 years earlier. Thus, these people were from the Troad and Western Anatolia region, and it's without a doubt that they were now marauding refugees instead of colonists and mercenaries fleeing their destroyed homeland Arzawa. The story of the Egyptian traveler Wenamun places the Tjeker in Tel Dor in the late 12th century BC, reporting that they were pirates. In this period, Tel Dor has yielded Pythie burial sites, but relatively little Philistine ware, making it a probable settlement of these Western Asiatic peoples, distinct from the Philistines. The Weshesh have not been identified with certainty on the depictions of the Egyptian reliefs. They have been linked with the coastal city of Iasos in Caria or the toponym Issos located in western Syria, and as we know, since both of these areas suffered great destruction, either one could be a plausible place of origin. But with the current evidence, nothing can be said with certainty, and they could be entirely other people altogether. A Bronze Age enthusiast will now claim, "But surely the Denyen must be Greeks, no doubt, as the Danae was a term used by Homer to describe the Achaeans, and Teneu or Deneu was a term for the homeland of the Mycenaeans according to the Egyptians." However, this presumption must be false. The area of Adana is proposed to be the homeland of the Denyen. Their country is mentioned to be one of the devastated ones by the Northerners, and their equipment is also similar to the rest of the Anatolian groups, not to mention they are also depicted marching with women and children. Therefore, any phonological similarity with the Greek Danae must be a coincidence, or perhaps there could be some truth to the myth of Danaos, who traveled from Egypt through southern Anatolia and then founded Argolid, perhaps a living memory shining light on the Anatolian origin of some Mycenaean Greek rulers, but that analysis falls outside the scope of this video. The last campaign of Ramesses, namely the Syrian War, shows as a result the capture of 7 enemy chiefs by the Egyptians. 4 of them are chiefs of the Sea people, namely Peleset, Thekel, Sherden and Teresh, showing that these people were not utterly vanquished in the year 8 war, but rather survived and settled Canaan and Syria, being strong enough to keep mounting a resistance. The other 2 of the chiefs are Syrian, and the last one, astonishingly, Hittite. Indeed, the presence of the Hittites amongst its previous vassals in Syria as refugees and allies of the Sea peoples makes total sense considering their homeland was devastated and occupied by foreigners. Being probably the founders of the Palestine kingdom we mentioned earlier, also known as the Philistines of the north. So what on earth happened after the Bronze Age collapse? Well, the Hittite Empire may have been overrun by the Phrygians and the Achaeans, but their descendants carried their legacy in Syro-Palestine. Pockets of their nation stayed alive in Anatolia, however, with the Isaurians in Scythia being direct descendants of the Luwo-Hittite collective surviving up until the 8th century AD, finally holding dominion over Anatolia for the last time after 1.5 millennia under Emperor Zenon the Isaurian. The Phrygians prospered for a while until an enemy far more fierce invaded from the north, similarly to what they have done, a story we'll analyze in another video. The remaining Martians and Libyans founded the Kingdom of Lydia, its etymology mostly accepted to be deriving from Lubia, the land of the Libyans. Some of the Teresh and the Tjeker may have migrated to the land of Umbri if the myth of Tirsinos or the legend of the foundation of Rome by Aeneas are to be believed. The Shekelesh migrated to Sicily, the event being known as the arrival of the Sicels in the 12th century BC, being one of the 3 main native tribes of the island in the Iron Age. The Sherden arrived in Sardinia, toppling the old Nuragic order and transforming the island in their image. The collapse of Egyptian authority saw new peoples migrating to Canaan, like the Philistines, Arameans and Hebrews, intermingling with the locals and creating great civilizations of their own. The Assyrians did quite well, their influence reaching well into the Mediterranean, paving the way for the rise of Persia. Mycenaean Greece would wither and fall apart, their final centers being overrun by the Dorians who took advantage of the power vacuum and obliterated the remaining Achaean elite, their story being remembered as the invasion of the sons of Heracles. Yet the colonists in Adana thrived up until the 7th century BC. The colonists in Cyprus gradually transformed the island so drastically that Greek has been the main language and culture of Cyprus to this day, more than 3,000 years later. Nevertheless, the mainland Mycenaean decline gave birth to ancient Greece, arguably the most creative nation of the Western world, their final adventures being remembered as epics like Homer's Iliad with the destruction of Troy and the arrival of the Greeks in Anatolia and Cyprus, and Odyssey as a journey to the west by the dislodged sea peoples, but that is a story for another time. Tragically, the most fascinating period of the Bronze Age is its end, but this catastrophe saw the gradual rise of a new world, a world mostly devoid of tyrannical superpowers, a world of widespread literacy and freedom that remembered these stories of the past as legends that founded the Western civilization. If you enjoy videos like this, consider supporting Project Glorious on Patreon. As a thanks, you get access to maps and art from our videos, exclusive articles written by our researchers, early access to videos, voting on and suggesting future topics, and much more. Click the link in the description.